Good afternoon, everybody. I'm not going to say welcome, because I guess most of you have been here all day and we've just arrived. But thank you very much for coming to this presentation, which is about the transatlantic approach towards China and the Indo-Pacific. And I think you probably know our guests. We have Camille Dawson, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary in the State Department's Bureau of Asian and Pacific Affairs, and Gabriele Visentin, the EU Special Envoy for the Indo-Pacific. And if I've butchered any names, you're welcome to butcher my name back. I'm Demetri Sevastopulo. I'm the Irish-Greek US-China correspondent at the Financial Times. We only have 40 minutes, so I'm going to jump in quickly and ask you both, Camille, starting with you. How has the US-EU approach to the Indo-Pacific changed or evolved during the first 17 months of the Biden administration?
Sure. Well, I would say that the most fundamental development that has occurred is the establishment of the US-EU or EU-US consultation on the Indo-Pacific. And that is done as a formal exchange led on the US side by our Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, and on the EU side by EEAS Secretary General Sanino. And we we have been using that dialogue, or that consultation, which started last November 2021, was the first iteration of that. That consultation has provided the framework for our two organizations to work together to identify where we have shared priorities in the Indo-Pacific, and to then start working through what I would loosely call a joint action plan. We meet at a number of levels very regularly to do that.
Gabriele.
Yes, absolutely. I agree, and that's definitely the major innovation. Probably I would simply like to complement by saying that thanks to this, in the last 12 months, let's say 15 months, we have seen the level and the depth of the EU-US or the US-EU cooperation, coordination, consultations reach an unprecedented level. And this is probably the most remarkable thing I want to underline.
The administration in the US came in talking about boosting cooperation, bolstering, strengthening alliances that maybe suffered in the previous 4 years. But what has, China done over the last 16 months that has either accelerated the cooperation between the EU and the US and made it easier for you to do things together that maybe perhaps might have been a little bit more difficult had China not done X, Y, or Z? Camille?
Well, I will sort of start by saying that I don't think it's all about what China has done or not done. It is actually more about not only the US and EU, but a whole range of partners, both inside the Indo-Pacific region and beyond, coming to what I would say is largely a shared vision for what we see as the way in which the region can prosper and be secure. Certainly China is a part of that region and plays a role, but it is more about our shared understanding of what we envision the region to be in the future and how we can work together to get there.
I think, Gabriele, just on the same theme, I remember after Biden was elected, but before he'd been inaugurated, Jake Sullivan tweeted at the EU, please don't sign, he hinted, please don't sign the comprehensive agreement on investment with China. And at the time, my sense from talking to Europeans was, hold on a second, you're not even in office yet. But actually, the end result is that China did do some things that seemed to shoot itself in the foot. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how that impacted the way Europe viewed the relationship.
Yeah, true, but let's frame it outside of the strategy for the Indo-Pacific, because the EU strategy for the Indo-Pacific was published in September 2021, does not aim at confronting China. It is a strategy for the region, and it's not targeted at one country, but it is really a comprehensive approach for the development of the region. What happened with the comprehensive agreement is as simple as that. It was agreed at technical level, parafed, but there were some behaviors of China, namely the retaliation that the Chinese authorities had against the members of the European Parliament, against ambassadors of the EU member states to the Political and Security Committee in Brussels, through which China actually imposed, on which China posed sanctions, and that meant that the processing of the agreement was blocked at the European Parliament level. That is is a necessary part of the decision making.
Can I ask you both? One of the questions when people visit Washington, and I often hear when they're talking about Indo-Pacific, is what is the goal of both the EU and the US Indo-Pacific policy? What are you hoping to achieve?
Yeah, in very broad brushstrokes, I would say that it is, on the US side, it is our affirmative vision for the region, a region which is free and open, connected, prosperous, secure, and resilient. And that vision, we recognize, can only be accomplished by working with partners and allies. It is not something that can be achieved by the actions of the US alone. And then the last thing I would mention is that it is a strategy that outlines what we are for. It's not who we are against.
Gabriele.
Absolutely. Our strategy, as the US one, is about cooperation, not confrontation. It's open to everybody who wants to join us, to everybody who wants to cooperate, and to create a prosperous and resilient Indo-Pacific region. For the EU, though, let me stress the very deep and strong geopolitical relevance and importance that the Indo-Pacific has. 40% of the trade towards the EU comes from the Indo-Pacific. The European Union is a resident actor in the Indo-Pacific. People tend to forget that there are more than 1.6 million EU citizens residing on EU soil, and it's also a physical presence that we have there, plus all the economic indicators like 60% of global GDP and other issues, which make the Indo-Pacific absolutely central and relevant. And this is why, to come back to your original question, our aim is to have a stable and prosperous region which allows the Indo-Pacific to stay free and open.
So when you're trying to pursue that policy, what are the main challenges for, we start with the US, Camille?
So there are some challenges that are global in nature, and some which have specific relevance to the region. Climate change. When we talk to Pacific Islands counterparts, they tell us that climate is the existential issue for them. And so that impacts that particular sub-region in a very real way. So we're working to identify with them, as well as with other partners, how we can help address that. Of course, COVID recovery is another very significant issue. And the influence of the PRC and PRC coercive activities are certainly present in the region, which is in China's backyard.
Gabriele.
Yeah, obviously, climate change is the key concern because it's not just a matter of going green in economical terms or following a green philosophy. For the Indo-Pacific, and above all for the Pacific Island states, it's an existential matter. I mean, the rise of the sea level means whether or not these countries will exist in the next 20 to 30 years. So when we, developed countries, become serious on fighting climate change, it shows empathy, it shows respect, and it shows attention also to the Pacific and the Indian states. Because when we address these issues, we should not only refer to them as polluters, but we also have to think about us as polluters. And in this vein, what is happening now in the Pacific region with the shift in terms of environmental policies by Australia, which is the biggest polluter of the Pacific, well, this is very encouraging. But if you allow me, there is probably a key element here that we should put on the table. There is a pre and a post-Ukraine war geopolitical situation also in the Indo-Pacific. And our challenges there have been, on one hand, enhanced, but on another side, eased by the war. It has been made clear that our resolve in defending the multilateral rules-based order resonates as well in the Indo-Pacific. The multilateral rules-based order, the UN Charter, the UN system is a guarantee, is the guarantor for countries which are not necessarily like-minded with us, but which have shared interest with us. Well, this multilateral order is also in their interest to be maintained and kept. And you can see from the numbers that the UNGA's resolutions had that there was a big traction also in the Indo-Pacific region on our views for that.
So, I mean, just piggybacking on that, what do you think, if anything, needs to be tweaked in both sides' Indo-Pacific strategies based on the Ukraine war and what we're seeing there?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there's anything specific. I mean, honestly, when we launched the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, it was in February of this year, really on the eve of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And so it was already on our minds when the strategy was released.
But there are no changes at all, because I mean, the national security strategy has still not come out because of the Ukraine war, and that's being factored into whatever the final product will be. So, Gabriele, from the European perspective, is there anything changed because of Ukraine in Asia?
Well, the European perspective has dramatically changed because of Ukraine, but the Indo-Pacific strategy as such, no, because in the Indo-Pacific strategy we have areas for cooperation, but we are also have an opening page which talks about principles, and the principles are multilateralism, UN Charter, UNCLOS. So this opening chapter has even been reinforced by what happened. So I don't think that there is a need for tweaking the text. There is a need for actually implementing it.
One thing, I just came back from the Shangri-La Dialogue Security Forum in Singapore last week. And the biggest topic there was Taiwan. And I know on the EU side that you don't have the defense prerogative in terms of the militaries. But how worried are people in Europe about Taiwan? And I ask because Southeast Asian officials I talked to in Singapore were increasingly pessimistic and felt that the US and China were on a collision course over Taiwan in a way that a year ago I didn't hear people saying.
Well, again, the interest of the EU is that the Indo-Pacific and the critical sea maritime routes remain free and open. And of course, this applies also to the South China Sea, East China Seas, and obviously to the Taiwan Strait. But having said that, the EU, as you said, let's come back. There is a clear difference between defense and security. So defense is the force, is when you apply force to counter an attack, whereas security are all create the conditions for preventing this attack to happen. So the EU is a clear actor in security. And we are acting a lot also on Taiwan to make sure that the security is conserved, not only in Taiwan, but for the region itself. So we are very active on cyber, we are very active on disinformation, and all that goes with security rather than defense.
If I can just follow up on one more thing, and then Camille, I'll come back to you. You know, at the Shangri-La dialogue, it was really interesting to see how many European officials, members of the European military, members of NATO, who were there compared to 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, when often the French defense minister would show up and pretty much nobody else. Maybe the Italians from time to time.
Maybe the UK
the UK. But what do you think explains the kind of the growing interest in Europe towards the Indo-Pacific? What is it that has sparked this big change?
The fact that the Indo-Pacific matters for the EU. I gave you a couple of numbers before in terms of economic interest that the EU has towards the Indo-Pacific, and this has led us to consider that we have to cooperate whenever we can, but we also have to protect whenever necessary. So that has increased our level of attention also to security and defense matters. And again, the post-Ukraine environment has, I mean, Ukraine has been a watershed, let's say, development, critical development in many aspects, including the EU's investment on defense. I mean, it's for the first time ever that the EU has invested more than 2 billion euros for providing military and lethal weapons to a country which has been attacked. And this shows that the EU now has arrived at a point where it does not shy away from engaging also in military terms. I would read this presence in the Shangri-La also against this prism.
Camille, in the wake of Ukraine still ongoing, to what extent are your conversations with people in Europe and also people in Asia, Southeast Asia, are they talking about Taiwan compared to before Ukraine?
I would say that it is generally in the context of people discussing the fact that we want to ensure that China is taking the right lessons from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And so that conversation is certainly happening on a regular basis. What I think many people have been surprised by is the way in which the US and Europe and Ukraine is one that we are all focused on immediately now, but also is a signal of what could be in the future, and that there is no concept of Europe looks at what's happening in Ukraine and the others don't pay attention, and also that as we look to what could happen in the Indo-Pacific in the future, that we will continue to work in a unified manner.
But do you hear increasing concern about possible conflict? Is that something that partners in the region raise with you in your conversations?
Certainly they raise it frequently. I wouldn't say that, I mean, they've been raising it for a long time. That is not necessarily new. Maybe the tempo at which they're raising it is slightly elevated, but it's not a new conversation that we're having.
Right, okay. Gabriele, you mentioned the Pacific Islands. And if I think back to, in March, I was traveling in Australia with a US official when the Chinese draft security agreement with the Solomon Islands leaked. And it was a huge story in Australia and New Zealand. My sense was back in Washington, it was maybe a big story among Asia policy circles, but in the media, it wasn't a huge story. I'm curious, how much of a wake-up call was that for both the US and the EU? And what are you doing differently in the wake of that? I mean, there's been so many officials from your colleagues, you yourself to Fiji, the Australians, the Japanese, Penny Wong from Australia. Everyone is going surfing in the Pacific Islands now. So how big a surprise was it and what impact is it having?
I would, if you allow me, I would comment a little bit on what Camille just said, and that would make a link with your question. It is clear that what happened in Ukraine has created a united front which has engaged many countries on restrictive measures, sanctions, on provision of military aid and financial aid to buy weapons, and humanitarian aid and help to migrants. And this is a united front which encompasses many countries, which, if you allow me a very non-sophisticated way to put it, has clearly shown a very high price tag to the ones who would like then to break in and fight the multilateral international order as we see it, which wants to fight peace and which wants to break the UN Charter and then the UN system. So I think that we have set up quite a high price tag for breaking the multilateral order. This is my take on that. Coming to the Solomon Islands, it has not taken us by surprise as such, because an action by the Chinese was expected in the region, but still we haven't seen the actual agreement with the Solomon. It has not been published. We are only talking about leaks of drafts. We don't even know if it has been signed yet. So we are really talking about speculations. But obviously, this has...
But China, just to be clear, China has not denied that draft was an actual draft, right?
Yeah, the Solomon neither, but none of the two have shown us the finally agreed, and nobody has shown us the signatures put on that. So let's see. But of course, this has brought us up, us, in front of a situation that could be worrisome. And that has created, let's say, an unprecedented wave of diplomatic actions in the region. The first was the US traveling there with the two top-level officials. Then, humbly, the EU sending me. And finally, having the newly elected, the new Foreign Affairs Minister of Australia, Penny Wong. And the narrative that we three used was the same. Respect for sovereign states, which are able to take sovereign decisions, create win-win situations, give them a development scheme that is appealing in the long term, in the long run, to make them understand that our way of engaging is transparent, is long-term, is principled, is high quality. And if you allow me, we fought opaqueness with transparency. And and then you see the United States came out with their economic framework for the Indo-Pacific, and surprise, surprise, the Indo-Pacific state rebooked the Chinese offer. So I think that what we were trying to explain before, that our alignment in our views, in our strategies, in our ways of seeing the region and the development of the region, has bore fruit.
Absolutely.
Camille.
Yeah, so obviously there has been an uptick in U.S. engagement with the Pacific Islands in recent months, and that has also been the case with the EU and other countries within the Indo-Pacific region. And we are speaking regularly with all of those partners and allies. We are seeking to coordinate our actions so that our work can have a multiplier effect, so that we are able to identify the unique capabilities that each of us brings, so that we can work to fill the needs that the Pacific Island countries themselves identify as being most critical. We're really focused on listening and learning from them, not trying to impose solutions, but rather understand what the needs are and how we can collectively work together to provide some of those solutions. I'll just note that we on the U.S. side have announced that we will be opening an embassy in the Solomon Islands, and we're looking to expand our diplomatic presence elsewhere in the Pacific Islands and beyond as well. And we're also looking to work across a range of our partnerships to provide solutions to the challenges faced by the Pacific Island countries. We're working with the Quad as one example.
Can I ask you both, one of the things that I hear from the region and from people in the Pacific Islands as well is that they feel there has been a tendency to do the opposite in the past of what you were just describing, which is instead of listening, what is it the Pacific Islands want, to kind of suggest to them this is what you need. And actually they're saying we want help with climate because it's existential for us. We want to be able to send students to US universities because that's critical for our education and our young people. But in the past, it's actually been a little bit more kind of dictatorial, if I can use that word loosely, from Washington. So has there been a shift in thinking?
I would say that we are sincere when we are listening and trying to understand what the leaders in the Pacific Islands themselves and the people of those nations say are their actual needs. You know, in addition to some of the things I already mentioned, recently the White House appointed a special presidential envoy for compact negotiations, working with the freely associated states to conclude those negotiations. We have been working with a broad range of partners to really meet the needs that have been outlined by Pacific Island partners. And when we were working to develop the Indo-Pacific strategy, the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, that was not done in a vacuum. That was with extensive consultations with partners inside and outside the region, and that includes the Pacific Islands themselves.
In a couple of moments, I'll go to the audience, but just one kind of broad question for both of you. Do you think your respective or in combination Indo-Pacific strategies will change China's behavior in any way?
I think so. I think it is clear that the Indo-Pacific strategy of the U.S. combined with the Indo-Pacific strategy of, under slightly different names. Not everyone calls it exactly the Indo-Pacific strategy, but under whatever name it is, that have those strategies that have been developed by our many partners and allies. Those combined indicate that there is a convergence of objectives in the region and that we are working together to meet those objectives. And we know that the very fact of so many, of this large network working together, we know it is of concern to Beijing because we pay attention to the narrative that they put out through the media and through other channels, and it's very clear that that the government in Beijing is very concerned about U.S. European alignment and the work we are doing jointly through our Indo-Pacific strategies.
So what would you, in terms of specifics, what do you think would be a good outcome if China may change X, Y, or Z in response to this combined effort? What do you think are the potential results that are feasible?
Fewer coercive, aggressive activities in the region. And that spans a wide range. Economic, disinformation, militarization. Please.
I tend to agree. But it's not just due to the Indo-Pacific strategies if there is a change of behavior in China. The Indo-Pacific strategy will surely be instrumental to that. But what our Indo-Pacific strategies will surely do will be to influence the behaviors of our partners in the region. I am not so sure that China will change only due to our strategies, but what I'm really convinced is that our positive narrative, our transparent, our forthcoming and respectful way of engaging, well, this will make a difference, and this will bring the countries in the region more to cooperate with us than we could have expected before having our respective strategies. So China, yes, will follow, but for sure our Indo-Pacific partners. And we have already seen it happening. It's already happening since some weeks.
Already happening in terms of?
In terms of deepening cooperation with us and refusing to deepen cooperation with China.
With China, okay. Any questions from the audience? For the purpose of everyone else, if you can tell them who you are, and as an Irishman, I only allow short questions.
Very, very good. I'll keep it brief. Well done, Vago Muradian with Defense and Aerospace Report. I mean, my simple question would be, we have a tendency of reacting to China. It's always after they do something that we go, oh my God, we have to be engaged in the Solomon Islands. How do we get into a mindset that is actually predictive, gets ahead of that power curve, as opposed to us being on the back foot and economically, militarily, engagement-wise, in a responsorial mode? Thanks very much.
Who would like to take that? Camille?
So I would say, in large part, I mean, I think actually Gabriele's answer to the last question sort of addresses that somewhat, which is that, so our Indo-Pacific strategies are intended to be exactly that. They are proactive, not reactive, right? It is establishing, the goal is to establish a region that is resilient to any kind of coercive actions, no matter who they are from. And so, in fact, that's exactly what we are attempting to do with the Indo-Pacific strategies, is set in place the conditions so that our actions are forward-looking and not reactive, and that it is the countries in the region acting both individually and as part of regional networks, that they are strengthened, and it is from seeing this, strengthened environment it's an automatic deterrent that prevents some of the actions we would need to react to.
Absolutely, totally agree. And if I close what you said is that we might have come in a bit later, but we do it better. No, really, I mean it. I mean it. Transparency, respect, real fight against climate change, multilateral order, democratic use of artificial intelligence and of technologies. I mean, these are all things which are not reactive, are proactive in the sense of portraying our concept of living together, our societies, and the proposal that we put forward are better, are later but better. We are more credible, even in terms of financing of infrastructures. I mean, we might come in later than the Chinese, but our infrastructure will be of high quality. Will not create debt strangles for the ones who then decide to set up infrastructures through our system. So it's definitely a better system that we bring forward.
Well, just to play devil's advocate, because apparently I'm paid to do that, One of the areas where China is very nimble is actually infrastructure, and although the US and European infrastructure may have higher quality, it often comes with various strings attached, and countries in the region often say, it's great, we'd love to have the best bridge or the best road, but actually what we'd really like is something quickly without any caveats. Sure. So how do you overcome that given the constraints of the political systems both in Europe and in the US?
Again, later but better. I mean, it's true, but look at also what happens most of times. The announcement that the Chinese do are not completely fulfilled, to put it diplomatically. So there are big announcements, but then the infrastructures don't follow as the announcement said. There is no clear development leverage for the countries which accept to build them because the workforce comes from China, is not local. Then sometimes the infrastructure are of poor quality, and after it's enough that you have a big tornado and then the railway goes away, is blasted away, or the highway as well. And even sometimes the works are left halfway through, they are not finished. And on top of that, the loans that finance these infrastructures are really strangling the, let's call them beneficiary countries.
The debt trap.
The debt trap, yes.
Okay. Camille, do you want to address that as well, or shall I?
I would just briefly say, actions often speak louder than words, right? And when we collectively provide solutions that are high quality, take into account high labor standards, and all of the things that Gabriele mentioned, that speaks to audiences.
Any other questions? Gentleman in the back here, just in front of me.
Kenjin Nagayoshi, research intern at the East-West Center. Japanese Prime Minister Kishida said at the Shangri-La Dialogue that Ukraine today can be Asia tomorrow. And when the Indo-Pacific states are sharing those concerns of possible conflict in the region, what do the US and the European Union expect those Indo-Pacific states themselves to do? And what can the EU and US can do to address their concerns about the possible conflict? Thank you.
Nice, easy one.
Sure, I can start. On the first part of that question, we have seen many countries in the Indo-Pacific region respond directly to the war of aggression in Ukraine by providing direct support to Ukraine. That has been in terms of assistance to Ukraine. It has been in terms of sanctions against Russia and many other coordinated actions. So they have stood up and demonstrated that unity of purpose. I think I would just say that as we look to anything in the future, there is no clearer signal than Asian partners, European partners, the United States, all working together with a shared purpose, and whether that is in Europe or the Indo-Pacific, the fact that we can work together and utilize our strong network, that's what's going to be the most critical going forward.
Can I just, we only have 1 minute left, so maybe the lady beside the gentleman just asked.
If I may.
You had a question as well? Maybe let's take hers and then if you can
Well, I would like to complement this because it's very important for us. I would like to underline how the actions to support Ukraine are considered by the EU as actions to support the EU as well. And the help that has been given to solve the Ukrainian crisis is being considered with great gratitude by the EU as well. And for example, you mentioned Japan. Well, we are extremely grateful that Japan even diverted a lot of its liquid natural gas, which they bought from Australia. It was diverted to help the EU to face the energy crisis. And these are things which will not go forgotten should a crisis arise in Asia. I mean, it's really help with like-minded and with friends. And these actions were really considered like this and will be reminded by us like this.
Okay, I'm sorry we've just run out of time, but maybe you can catch the two of them off the stage in a second. I'd just like to thank you both for sharing your time today, talking about this, and thank you everyone in the audience. Appreciate it.